Hi, I'm Gal Pastor, chaplain historian, mom theologian, and what else? Dog owner. Have you been reading or listening to the Passion narratives? I am getting so much out of them this Lent. Again, I'm talking here about how I see my personal biblical interpretation flourish when I handle the texts in larger chunks. The height of my engagement with the scriptures remains memorization of entire books or larger portions. I got so much out of that memorization, I didn't even know that there was that level of insight possible. When I take in the passion narrative of each gospel as a whole, all these details jump at me, marvelous, intriguing details, and I just keep exclaiming, redemption is in the details for me this season. I note specific wording, relationships, or plot lines, then I ask questions, I go study a bit, and things are illuminated for me. Scripture, I tell you. Pull that thread, see where it goes. And I mean that not in the sense of collapsing the whole structure, but unraveling the meaning. This Lent, I'm specifically struck by the events of that night before the crucifixion, how chaotic it was. After that tender, lovely dinner, everything goes downhill for pretty much all the characters. In the chaos of that night, we follow several storylines. They're both intentionally parallel and contrasting. The closest friends of Jesus are a mess. Things are starting to disintegrate quickly. Jesus, of course, predicts all of it. The betrayal, scattering, scandalization, fear and sorrow, his death, departure, and return. They have no clue what he's talking about. They're repeatedly baffled. All four evangelists take time to describe the disciples' feelings following Jesus' announcement about betrayal at dinner and into that night. Walking away from the upper room, their tummies are full, but their hearts are anxious. And walking into the Garden of Gethsemane with Jesus, only to fall asleep seemingly momentarily, Luke tells us they're simply exhausted by sorrow. Exhausted by sorrow. But nothing has happened yet. And when Jesus wakes them up, we are told they don't even know what to say to him, dumbfounded by where all this is headed. Wherever I turn in the chaos of that night, I see this heart-wrenching spectacle of humans just missing the mark, left and right. Peter is at the forefront of the story. His every instinct that night was wrong. He just couldn't do anything right. It begins by him trying to prevent the Lord from washing his feet. After he wholeheartedly pledges his faithfulness, the man can't even stay awake. Then he decides that the right thing to do to protect Jesus is to get his machaira out. Machaira, Greek, a large sword or a large knife, probably smaller than this. My kids have our garage filled with such arsenal. And cut someone's ear off. Wrong again. But it does facilitate Jesus' last healing miracle. Peter is a wreck. 1 minute he is swearing he would be the last to ever leave him. The next he is calling down curses on people who dare associate him with Jesus. Apart from Jesus cursing the fig, we've never heard anybody call curses. Not one of his disciples swore before. As a side note, I do wonder what kind of curses and swears they had. You know how each culture kind of has a unique imagery in that realm. Anybody wants to pull that thread, a closer look at cursing in the New Testament, you are welcome, seminary student looking for a paper topic. 1 minute Peter's cursing, the next, this tough Middle Eastern fisherman is found weeping, and the scripture qualifies the tears as bitter, highly emotional times. He is unhinged, falling apart, failing himself, failing his Lord, regret on every front. In the moments that mattered, turns out Peter was not the person he thought he was going to be. Bitter regret follows. And we don't hear from him again, just gone, weeping bitterly into hiding. Then, in the chaos of that night, we turn to see Judas, seized with remorse. He regrets exchanging a kiss for money, regrets leading the man to Jesus. He can't keep the money. He can't return the money. Eventually, he can't even live. We are shown how his emotions spiral into deadly regret. We don't hear the specifics about other disciples, but we can assume that they are going through similar emotions, as apart from John, they all disappear into the night, surely not at peace. If you widen the lens beyond the disciples, there is more regret around Jesus. Pilate's regret symbolized in the washing of his hands, his wife's regret that the husband didn't heed the dream's warning. Even the centurion under the cross, in his exclamation, "That surely was the Son of God," was there regret? What then have I done? And then Luke has the crowds leaving the public spectacle of crucifixion, beating their breasts in anguished remorse. In contrast, and it is a clear contrast, the way especially Mark interweaves Jesus' trial and Peter's denial, invites a comparison between Jesus' boldness and Peter's onset of timidity. If you look at Jesus that night, we are told that he is emotional as well. He's feeling a lot, agony, anxiety. I'd call it fearful anticipation, and I'm fine with using that word because I don't think experiencing fear is in any way sinful. Peter took a measure of himself and was found severely lacking, especially compared to the man over there being slapped, mocked, and flogged. Jesus' steadfastness and determination, for me, is contrasted to the chaos of human emotions, lack of clarity, and then regretful choices. Around him in every direction, regret is palpable. Regret jumps out as the theme here. Indeed, regret seems to me is a prevalent byproduct of the human condition. Even as you see the two way back leaving the Garden of Eden, don't you think regret looms large over them? Then what? Is there a way to be delivered from these all-consuming regrets at the core of the human condition and actions? The Gospel of John in particular helps us resolve this in terms of the plot. He closes the narrative loop in one of the first resurrection appearances. John invites us to an intimate setting of another meal. Last time Jesus was washing their feet. This time he's cooking for them. As a side note, I think had Judas not allowed his regret to swallow up his very life, Jesus would have had a meal with him too. The question repeated 3 times for Peter by Jesus here has nothing to do with what you did or didn't do for me that night. Instead, how do you feel about me? And with John's gospel, it's always deeper. There are always layers of symbolism and meaning under reality. What's the disposition of your heart towards me? Do you love me? Peter is initially baffled again, even hurt, we are told. All he knows are transactional human relationships, and according to them, he's a full-blown failure. Jesus shortcuts that maddening cycle of breastbeating and bitter regret. And this is where we learn that the antidote to regret is love. Love is a huge theme in John. The word is used 15 times in Matthew, 7 times in Mark, 14 times in Luke, and 39 times in John. 27 of those 39 times are in the Passion narrative. Love permeates the monologues and the prayer of Jesus starting in John 13. There is no way when you ingest John's Passion narrative in one helping that you would miss that connection between the restoration of Peter and the previous usage of the word love. And you would surely remember that in two of these uses, Jesus had declared, "Whoever loves me will be loved by my Father." Now, you can go pull on another thread and investigate further the two words used for love in this exchange, agapao and phileo, and see what's there to gain. I decided I need a better understanding of how this love is further described in John, and I landed on the word abiding, indwelling, or simply being. And it is a term that in John describes the abundant, constant flow of a loving relationship between the disciples, Jesus, and God the Father in chapters 13 through 17. That's what Peter experienced in the course of answering those questions. That ultimately restful place of abiding love. I wonder in the aftermath, how often did Peter go back to the night of many regrets and cringe? If he did at all. Or was he instead heard saying, perhaps often even bragging, that he got to say 3 times to the Lord that yes, he loved him? Also, another thread that I would like to follow is sort of a cultural context question. How many times did Middle Eastern men of that era say to each other that they loved each other? How expressive were they? Or was this exchange totally out of the ordinary? It has been very helpful to me seeing this dynamic between the human pandemic of regret and its antidote of love, and how John shows both in one storyline. I attend a liturgical church, and every Sunday we have a confession followed by forgiveness and absolution. I don't want to do a lot of caveats here. I grew up Catholic. From my early teens, I spent time sitting in that confessional, listing my sinful patterns to a priest opposite of me. I understand the practice. I value its biblical grounding and long historical usage. Don't have problems with confessing sins. But in the aftermath of that portion of the liturgy, I often feel just so very dissatisfied. I've confessed and been absolved. Why am I still weeping bitterly, as it were? Something is amiss. I think I'm left troubled by lingering deep regret. Regret about not living up to who I would like to be for my God. Regret that here I am once again stomping all over the precious Imago Dei gifted to me. Regret that I am that heart-wrenching human spectacle myself, trapped in the cycle of mess and chaos. That feeling is often not alleviated by confession of things I've done or left undone, as the wording bids. This dynamics discovered here and experienced by Peter, the interplay of regret and love, speaks to me. So I find myself imagining the liturgy moving from confession through absolution to a triple "do you love me" question. The invitation to move unburdened into a completely different realm from this indwelling regret into abiding, relational, divine love.